Teacher, why are you late, Joseph? Joseph, there was a sign down the road. Teacher, what did the sign say that made you late? Joseph, it said, school ahead. Go slow. A wife is very disappointed in her husband because she just knows that he is a poor man after marriage. Wife, why don't you tell me if you are a poor man? Husband, I already told you before if I have nothing, only you. And you said, oh, it's so sweet. A few years ago, I decided to visit my brother who was stationed in Germany. I assumed that most Germans would speak English, but I found that many people spoke only their native tongue, including the ticket inspector on the train. He punched my ticket, then chatted cordially for a bit, making gestures like a windmill. I simply nodded from time to time to show him that I was interested. When he had gone, an American soldier in the compartment leaned forward and asked if I spoke German. No, I confessed. Then that explains, she said, why you didn't bat an eyelid when he told you that you were on the wrong train. Granny is sitting patiently in the waiting room at the doctor's office. After about half an hour, the doctor's assistant enters and announces, I'm sorry, but the doctor won't be able to see any more patients today. Granny smiles, kindly, but stays seated. The assistant, growing frustrated, raises her voice, eventually shouting so loudly that the windows begin to shake. Granny continues smiling and calmly returns to her magazine. Finally, the exasperated assistant writes the message on a slip of paper and holds it up in front of Granny's face. Granny nods, a bit sheepish, and says, That's very sweet of you, dear, but I've forgotten my glasses. Could you read it out to me? The other day, Grandpa heard his 18-year-old grandson complimenting his girlfriend on how good she gives head. Just after the call, Grandpa queried his grandson, Son, what's meant by giving head? His son replied coyly, Oh, it is just jargon for giving suggestions. A fortnight came. The family was dining when Mom initiated a conversation between Grandpa. Mom, Dad, since we're a few days away from your birthday, tell us what you want for your birthday. Grandpa, I don't know, but I think my grandson here can give me some head. A man runs to the doctor and says, Doctor, you've got to help me. My wife thinks she's a chicken. The doctor asks, How long has she had this condition? 2 years, says the man. Then why did it take you so long to come and see me? Asked the shrink. The man shrugs his shoulder and replies, We needed the eggs. 2 babies were sitting in their cribs when one called out to the other, Are you a little girl or a little boy? The second baby giggled and said, I'm not sure. What do you mean you're not sure? Asked the first baby, puzzled. I just don't know how to tell, replied the other. The first baby chuckled. Well, I know how to figure it out. I'll come over and see for myself. He carefully climbed into the other baby's crib and disappeared under the blankets. After a moment, he emerged with a big grin. You're a little girl, and I am a little boy, he declared triumphantly. Wow, you're so smart, said the baby girl. But how did you know? It was easy, the baby boy replied with a smile. You've got pink socks and I've got blue ones. All the good knights were leaving for the Crusades. One knight told his best friend, My bride is without doubt one of the most beautiful women in the world. It would be a terrible waste if no man could have her. Therefore, as my best and most trusted friend, I am leaving you the key to her belt to use, should I not return from the crusade. The company of knights was only a kilometre or so out of town when they noticed a cloud of dust approaching. Thinking it might be an important message from the town, the column halted. A horseman approached. It was the knight's best friend. He was yelling, "Hey, you gave me the wrong key!" A news photographer needed to charter a flight to take some arrival photos, so he phoned the local airport to inquire. He was told a plane would be waiting for him there that afternoon. Arriving at the airport, he spotted a plane warming up outside a hangar. He jumped in with his bag, slammed the door shut, and shouted, "Let's go!" The pilot taxied out, swung the plane into the wind, and took off. Once in the air, the photographer instructed the pilot, "Fly over the valley and make low passes so I can take pictures." "Why?" asked the pilot. "Because I'm a photographer for the news," he responded, "and I need to get some close-up shots." The pilot was strangely silent for a moment. Finally, he stammered, "So what you're telling me is you're not my flight instructor?" After a lecture on mental health, the psychology teacher asked, "How would you diagnose a patient who paces back and forth, shouting one moment, then sits weeping the next?" From the back of the room, a student raised his hand and said, "Sounds like a basketball coach to me." Little Johnny and his friend Billy were strolling through the park when they came across 3 women sitting on a bench, each eating a banana. As they passed by, Johnny cheerfully said, "Howdy, ladies." Curious, Billy asked, "Do you know those women?" "Nope," Johnny replied, "but I can tell you who they are: the nun, the prostitute, and the bride." Stunned, Billy asked, "How in the world did you figure that out?" Johnny grinned and explained, "Well, the nun held the banana in one hand and used the other hand to break it into small, neat pieces before eating it. The prostitute," he continued, "grabbed the banana with both hands and shoved the whole thing into her mouth." "Wow, that's pretty clever," Billy said, impressed. "But how did you know the third one was a bride?" Johnny chuckled. "Oh, that was the easiest one. She held the banana with one hand and pushed her head towards it with the other." Jon and Mike, both of whom had hair lips, hadn't seen each other for 10 years since high school. They happened to run into each other on the street, but Jon no longer has a hair lip. Mike cries, "Jon, Jesus peen so young think I then you. Put tell me what's happening with your hair lip." Jon says, "It's amazing, isn't it? I don't know why it happened, but one night my wife gave me oral sex, and when I woke up the next day, it was all healed. Promise me you'll try the same thing and see if it works for you." Mike promises to try the cure and meet Jon the next week. When they meet again, Mike still has a hair lip. Jon says, "Well, Mike, it looks like it didn't work for you, huh?" Mike says, "No, Jon, but I must say, you have a lovely home." During a particularly sarcastic lesson, the teacher asked, "If there are any idiots in the room, would they please stand up?" After a long pause, one freshman slowly stood. The teacher, surprised, asked, "Why do you consider yourself an idiot?" The student replied, "Oh, I don't. I just didn't want to see you standing all alone." In an earth science class, the teacher was explaining map reading and asked, If I said we're meeting for lunch at 23 degrees, 4 minutes north latitude and 45 degrees, 15 minutes east longitude, where would that be? After a moment of confusion, a student replied, "Probably eating by yourself." The physics teacher said, Isaac Newton was sitting under a tree when an apple fell on his head, leading him to discover gravity. Isn't that amazing? A student responded, "Yes, sir, but if he had been stuck in a classroom staring at books like us, he might not have discovered anything." 3 elderly women were discussing their various age-related woes. 60 is the worst age, said Ruth, who was 60. You always feel like you need to pee, but most of the time, nothing happens. That's nothing, replied Maxine, who was 70. When you're 70, you can't have a bowel movement no matter what you do. You take laxatives, eat bran, sit on the toilet all day, and still nothing happens. Actually, said Gilda, who was 80. 80 is the worst age of all. Do you have trouble peeing too? Ruth asked. No, I pee every morning at 6 a.m., Gilda said. I pee like a racehorse. No problem at all. Do you have trouble with bowel movements? Maxine asked. Nope, I have one every morning at 6:30 a.m., Gilda responded. Confused, Ruth asked, so what's so tough about being 80-wise? I don't wake up until 7, Gilda said with a grin. An Arizona Highway Patrol officer pulls over a Harley rider for speeding and asks for his name. Fred, the old biker replies. Fred what? The officer inquires. Just Fred, the man responds. In a good mood and thinking about letting the biker off with a warning, the officer presses, Come on, what's your last name? The old man sighs and says, I used to have a last name, but I lost it. The officer, now curious and a bit amused, decides to play along. Okay, Fred, how did you lose your last name? The biker leans back and begins his tale. Well, it's a long story. I was born Fred Johnson, worked hard in school, got good grades, and decided to become a doctor. After years of study, I earned my degree and became Fred Johnson, Maryland. But after a while, being a doctor got dull, so I went back to school and became a dentist. Now I was Fred Johnson, Maryland, DDS. Things were fine until I started fooling around with my assistant, and she gave me VD. So then I was Fred Johnson, Maryland, DDS with VD. The ADA found out about the VD and took away my DDS, so I was just Fred Johnson, Maryland with VD. Then the AMA heard about it, and they took away my MD, so I was just Fred Johnson with VD. Finally, the VD took away my Johnson, and that's how I became just Fred. The officer walked away, laughing so hard he had tears in his eyes. Betty and Harold, an elderly couple, were on a much-anticipated road trip across the country, reliving memories from their younger days. Betty, ever the adventurous spirit, insisted on driving, even though her hearing wasn't what it used to be. As they cruised along a scenic highway, the flashing lights of a highway patrol car appeared in the rear-view mirror. Betty pulled over, and the officer approached their car with a friendly yet firm demeanor. Ma'am, did you know you were speeding? The officer asked. Betty, catching only the movement of his lips, turned to Harold with a puzzled look. What did he say? Harold, used to translating for his wife, raised his voice. He says you were speeding. Oh dear, Betty muttered as she fumbled in her purse. The officer, noticing her flustered state, gently asked, May I see your license, ma'am? Once again, Betty turned to Harold. What did he say? He wants to see your license, Harold repeated, trying not to chuckle. Betty handed her license to the officer, who took a moment to glance at it. Ah, I see you're from Arkansas, he remarked, his tone lightening. I spent some time there once. had a blind date with a woman who was, well, quite memorable. Betty squinted at the officer, then looked at Harold. What did he say this time? Harold paused, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. He said he knows your mother. Betty blinked, then burst into laughter, realizing her husband's little joke. The officer, catching on, chuckled too, and with that, the three shared a good-natured laugh. The kind that makes you feel like you've known each other for years. The officer gave them a friendly warning, and Betty and Harold continued on their way, their spirits a little lighter, their hearts a little warmer, and their bond as strong as ever. 5 years after their wedding, on Valentine's Day, the husband brought home a bouquet of white roses for his wife. The wife looked at the roses and said, "On Valentine's Day, people usually give red roses. Why did you bring white ones?" The husband smiled and replied, "Darling, in life, what we need more than love is peace and comfort." A little boy approaches his father and asks, "Daddy, how was I born?" The father chuckles and replies, "Well, son, it's a bit of a modern tale. Your mom and I met through an online forum. We exchanged messages, and eventually we decided to meet up in person at a cozy coffee shop. We hit it off immediately. After a few dates and many more conversations, we realized we wanted to spend our lives together. It was like finding the perfect code for a complex program. One day, we got the exciting news that our lives were about to become even more wonderful. It was like receiving an unexpected upgrade. And just like that, 9 months later, we were blessed with you, our greatest joy. So you could say that instead of a pop-up, we got the most incredible download of all." On the first night of their honeymoon, the husband was nervously contemplating how to break the news to his bride about his stinky feet and smelly socks. At the same time, the wife was secretly worrying about how to confess her own secret, her terrible morning breath, which she had managed to hide until now. After some inner turmoil, the husband finally mustered up the courage and said, "I have a confession to make." The wife, relieved to hear those words, leaned in closer, looked into his eyes and said, "Darling, so do I." Taken aback, the husband recoiled slightly and blurted out, "Don't tell me, you've eaten my socks." Phil goes to Europe and leaves his favorite dog with his brother James. While in Europe, Phil calls James to check on his dog and asks, "So James, how's my favorite dog doing?" James very tersely replies, "Your dog is dead." "What?" says Phil. "You can't just tell someone their favorite dog is dead without a warning. You have to ease them into it." "How?" asks James. "Well, the first day I call, tell me my dog is on the roof. Then tell me the dog is going to be fine and not to worry. The next day, when I call to ask about my dog, tell me that you are about to get it down. When it jumped off of the roof and broke its leg, tell me the doctors say it will be okay, but that it will have to stay at the vet's for a while. Are you getting all of this?" "Yes," says James. "Good," says Phil. "Then the next day when I call back, tell me that there was severe internal bleeding that the vet didn't pick up, and that my favorite dog died at 2 o'clock this morning. That way it won't be such a shock to me. Got it?" "Yes." "Good. So how's Grandma doing?" asks Phil. "Well." James replies, "She's on the roof." A man went to the doctor complaining of insomnia. The doctor gave him a thorough examination, but found absolutely nothing physically wrong with him. So he sat him down and told him, "Listen, if you ever expect to cure your insomnia, you just have to stop taking your troubles to bed with you." "I know," said the man with a sigh, "but I can't. My wife refuses to sleep alone." A man tells one other, "Remember, when money will appear for you, women will appear. When women will appear, money will disappear. When money will disappear women for you. When women will disappear, money will appear for you. My dear, if from this circle to blot out women, you will be a fairy tale, a rich man." One man asked Russian man, "Please tell me, how you earned the first million?" He, "Oh, it was uneasily. I went to far north and an airplane loaded full of snow and sold in one African country." The first man, "What's the snow?" Russian answered, "Not an airplane." A thief comes to the farmer's barn to steal a chicken. Then one day, the farmer caught him stealing again. After confronting the thief, he held him so he wouldn't get away. "I will take you to the sheriff," says the farmer. The thief begged him and asked for his forgiveness. The farmer then thought to himself, "I will give the thief a lesson." So he said, "All right, I won't bring you to the sheriff, but I will let you have this chicken. Whatever you do to this chicken, I will do to you. If you poke the chicken's eye, I poke your eye. If you pull its feather, I'll pull your hair. If you break its neck, I'll break your neck." The thief feels sad and thought for a while. He took a deep breath, close his eyes, say a prayer, then kiss and smell and rub his face on the chicken's bowl. The farmer, well, he fainted. A woman, frustrated because her husband was late coming home from golf yet again, decided to leave a note that read, "I've had enough. I'm leaving you. Don't try to find me." She then hid under the bed to watch his reaction. Soon after, her husband came home. She could hear him in the kitchen before he made his way into the bedroom. She watched as he walked over to the dresser, picked up the note, and read it. After a moment, he scribbled something on the note, then picked up the phone and called someone. "She's finally gone. Yeah, it's about time. I'm on my way. Wear that sexy French nightie. I love you. Can't wait to see you. We'll do all the naughty things you like." He hung up, grabbed his keys, and left. As she heard the car drive away, she crawled out from under the bed, furious and heartbroken. With trembling hands, she picked up the note to see what he had written. "I can see your feet. We're out of bread. Be back in 5 minutes." A Scouser walks into the local benefits office, walks up to the counter to collect his fortnightly gyro and says to the woman, "You know something? I just hate being on the dole. I'd really rather have a job." The benefits worker behind the counter tells him, "Your timing is excellent. We have just got a job opening from a very wealthy old man. He wants a chauffeur and bodyguard for his nymph daughter. You'll have to drive around in his Mercedes or his Rolls Royce. He'll supply all of your clothes, credit cards, and money. Because of the long hours, all your meals will also be provided. You'll be expected to escort his beautiful daughter on her overseas holiday trips. You'll have to satisfy all of her needs, including any physical urges. You'll have a 2-bedroom apartment above the garage, and the starting salary is £200,000 a year." The Scouser says, "You're bullshitting me." The benefits worker says, "Yeah, but you started it." Two men were washed ashore during WL1. Their ship, an aging minesweeping model, had wrecked off the coast of an uninhabited island. As the older veteran worked to build a makeshift camp, the younger soldier managed to salvage a radio and quickly telegraphed an SOS with their coordinates. To their surprise, a ship responded within the hour, confirming that it could arrive at their position in approximately 2 weeks. The old vet sighed and shook his head, saying he'd rather take his chances swimming out to the wrecked ship and trying to repair it. The young soldier scoffed. "You'd really rather play with that old Minecraft all day." The older man shrugged. "It's better than a fortnight." A man stumbles into a bar, clearly already drunk, and asks for a drink. The bartender shakes his head and says, "Sorry, but you've clearly had too much already." Irritated, the man huffs out the front door and re-enters through the side. "How about now? Can I get a drink?" The bartender repeats, "Sorry, you can't have a drink here." Determined, the man staggers out once more, only to come back in through the back door. "Please, can I have a drink?" The bartender, now frustrated, yells, "I told you, no drinks!" The man squints at the bartender and says, "Man, how many bars do you work at?" A man was telling his co-worker one day that the company was transferring him to Chicago. He explained that he was going to quit before he had to move there. When asked why, he replied that he was just too afraid of all the crime, even though he would be passing up a big salary increase and greater benefits. His co-worker said he should reconsider. Chicago was a magnificent city, with world-class museums, loaded with a great history, sights, good public transportation, etc. Then he said, "Why, I myself worked in Chicago for almost 10 years, and in all that time, I never ever had a problem with crime while I was working." The first asked, "What did you do there?" To which the other replied, "I was tail gunner on a bread truck." Jane read that milk baths would make her beautiful, so she left a note for her milkman to leave 15 gallons of milk at her door. When the milkman read the note, he felt there must be a mistake. He thought she probably meant 1.5 gallons, so he knocked on the door to clarify the message. Jane came to the door, and the milkman said, "I found your note to leave 15 gallons of milk. Did you mean 15 gallons or 1.5 gallons?" "I want 15 gallons. I'm going to fill my bathtub up with milk and take a milk bath," Jane replied. "Oh, okay. Pasteurized?" asked the milkman. "No, just up to my chest," said Jane. A young couple had neighbours who were senior citizens. The young couple were very fond of the elderly couple and made it a point to visit them and have coffee with them every Sunday. They observed that the old lady would bring the coffee bottle to her husband to be opened every time. The thoughtful young man gifted the lady a gadget without her husband's knowledge to easily open the bottle and showed her how to use it. On their next visit, the old lady once again brought the bottle for her husband to open. The young couple was amazed. Had she forgotten about the gadget? When the opportunity arose to be alone with the old lady, they quizzed her about this. Her reply made them speechless. She said, "Oh, I can open the bottle myself, even without your gadget. But I get him to open it so he feels he is still stronger than I am, and thus the man of our home, that he remains useful to me as always, that I still depend on him, that togetherness is the main ingredient of any marriage. We don't have many more years of life in us, and togetherness is of utmost importance.